Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. Today is the anniversary of the Obergefell decision, which made marriage equality law of the land in the United States. And as we celebrate and conclude the final days of Pride Month, we have an historic opportunity to right the wrongs of our past. Back in 2008, voters passed Proposition 8, which eliminated the rights of same-sex couples to marry. That is still in our California Constitution. And because of the recent rulings of the United States Supreme Court overturning over 50 years of rights that have been afforded with respect to abortion and reproductive freedom, they've made it abundantly clear that marriage equality is not a guaranteed right. And that's why we have an opportunity to repeal Proposition 8 in our California Constitution, as well as enshrining marriage equality protections for same-sex couples, as well as interracial marriage. Now, many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have highlighted some concern that I want to address. This constitutional amendment does not redefine the definition of marriage. No member of the clergy or any member of any religious denomination has ever been forced to marry. That is constitutional law. It is the current law, it was past law, and it is future law. To hone in on that additional key aspect of which I know my colleagues have deep faith and also entrust that the intent is well recognized. I also intend, upon conclusion of the legislative process, to submit a letter to the Journal. With permission to read, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
In addressing the concerns, the letter of Journal would state accordingly: Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5 would affirm the constitutional right to marry as currently recognized by the state and federal case law. It would not impact the eligibility requirements to get married or to perform a marriage, or the mechanics of issuing licenses or solemnizing marriages, all of which are set forth in statutory law, which is that a priest, rabbi, or authorized persons of any religious denomination shall not be required to solemnize a marriage that is contrary to the tenets of a person's faith. Additionally, the United States Constitution protects all Americans' rights to the free exercise of religious faith, including the right of clergy and religious denominations to choose which marriages they solemnize. Marriage equality for same-sex couples has now been law of the land in California for over a decade, and no clergy member or religious denominations have ever been forced to perform marriages that do not accord with their faith. This would remain unchanged following the approval of Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5. So, colleagues, I hope this addresses the concern specifically that have been raised about religious protections. And if it can also just allow for those who still are not compelled, for those who are still not, for those who may not find the love in their hearts, to recognizing that the antidote to hate is love. Please hear a quote that has been stated by a number of members of our community, and that is to say, "We hope you love your family more than you hate ours." I'm hopeful that you can find the love in your hearts and recognizing that we just want to be in a loving, committed relationship and supporting family values just as everyone else. Colleagues, we have a unique opportunity to restore the past and the injustices of many Californians who have come before us. Let's be on the right side of history and supporting interracial marriage and marriage equalities for all of Californians and our beautiful state. I respectfully ask for aye vote and respect immediate transmittal to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. And Senator McCarty, you're recognized on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support as a co-author of this measure from our colleague from the Silicon Valley. This is a bipartisan measure, I will note, not political. and it puts this measure on the ballot where the voters, the people of California, can appropriately weigh in. You know, this morning I dropped my kids off to high school for the first time. It's not high school time, but I went to their high school for the first time. And I remember I went to a rally against Prop 8 when they were 3 months old. And I was thinking about this debate today, and they're years from now, they're going to say, what was California, what were we even talking about? Why was this even controversial? We know the attitudes of the electorate, especially young people, have changed dramatically on this. So this young people, this isn't even an issue. Like, why are you even talking about this right now? But the reality is it is, because while the Supreme Court struck this 5 years ago, it's still in the books. It's a scar. And we have the opportunity every once in a while to right a wrong, which is what we will be attempting to do with the passage of ACA 5 with 2/3 votes from us, Senate, and then go to the voters. They will ultimately weigh in, righting a wrong. And why I really am so focused and this issue is so personal to me, because I'm a loving kid. For those of you who don't know, I know my colleague from Oakland knows about it. She talks about it quite often. She has a loving family. I'm a product of a biracial marriage. My parents met 5 blocks from here in 1970, moved to Virginia. I was born there. They got married in 1970. 3 years earlier, they couldn't have been married. It was illegal for them to be married. So kids, this generation, the same thing. Are you kidding me? People couldn't love one another based upon their race? Well, that was the law of our land 56 years ago. California family went to the California Supreme Court. Then Richard and Mildred Loving did the same thing to make sure they had the opportunity to love one another in the state of Virginia. So this is an issue core to all of us in America. The Supreme Court 5 years ago used the Loving decisions as a basis to legalize marriage equality in California. This is a very personal issue for me. I know there's a bunch of other loving family members in this room, either them or their kids or people they know. And this is about righting that wrong, focusing on the future of California, and making sure that everybody has a chance to live their best lives and love one another how they wish to do so. Respectfully ask your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarty. And Assemblymember Wallace, you're recognized on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today as a proud co-author of ACA 5. Our country was founded on a declaration that all of us are created equal, and all of us are endowed by our Creator with an inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These declarations are what make the United States exceptional. It makes us proud to be Americans, and it's why I urge your support in putting ACA 5 before the voters. This constitutional amendment honors the values upon which our nation was conceived. It ensures that all marriages are equal under the eyes of the law. In doing so, it brings us closer to achieving the equality imagined by our forefathers. Only by protecting all marriages can we guarantee all Californians access to this sacred institution for their own pursuit of happiness. I say that we don't have to understand someone's life to support that they have the right to live it. I have a hard time seeing it any other way. As Republicans, we fight every day to preserve a limited government that does not infringe upon our personal liberties, a government that tells us what we can or cannot do. Why would we want government telling us who we can and cannot marry? That's the essence of ACA 5. The right to marry the person whom we love and to whom we are committed is fundamental. Our California Constitution should be clear that government cannot interfere with that right. I've heard the criticism that ACA 5 would somehow force a person to conduct a wedding even if they were opposed to the marriage. As a person of faith, I would reject ACA 5 if that were true, but it is false. Under the Free Exercise Clause of the United States and California Constitutions, we have the right to worship God and practice our faith according to the dictates of our conscience. ACA 5 will not change that. Members, let the voters protect the pursuit of happiness. ACA 5 is the preservation of our sacred American principles. It's an endorsement of individual freedom, and it's simply the right thing to do. I urge an aye vote on ACA 5.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. And Assemblymember Pellerin, you're recognized on the measure.
Thank you. I rise as a co-author of ACA 5 and also as a former county clerk, commissioner of civil marriage, where I've conducted hundreds of weddings. And it was so difficult to tell people who were same-sex couples that I could not issue them a marriage license or I could not conduct their wedding. And when the courts ruled that same-sex marriage was allowed, it was the most fantastic, beautiful day in my career. We had rainbow roses. We did 3 weddings every half hour. Anybody who wanted to get married could get married on that day. And it was just hearing the stories of people who have been together for decades and not allowed to have their love recognized in a legal marriage. It was just a fabulous, memorable day for me. And then when Proposition 8 came on our ballot, and I was also the registrar of voters, I could not take a position on that proposition. I think we did our last wedding about 11 p.m. that night, making sure that a couple could have their marriage legalized on that fatal day. And it was frustrating to then wake up the next day and know that I could no longer issue those licenses and could not conduct those marriage ceremonies. Until the Supreme Court ruled once and for all this is legal. Love is love. I've also been quoted as saying love is essential, and people who want to get married should be allowed to get married. So when I ran for this seat, when I was asked what was my top legislative priority, it was this. It was to enshrine in our Constitution that love is recognized, and you may marry whoever you choose, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of the color of your skin. So I stand proudly with my colleague from Silicon Valley in urging your aye vote on this very important measure that we're going to send to the voters, and we will once and for all settle this issue in California. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pellerin. And Assemblymember Lee, you're recognized on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. When Proposition 8 was unfortunately passed in the ballot, as many of our colleagues brought their guests, I was basically the same age as some of the guests today, some of the children. I was in middle school. And you know what that sent, the message, look, the period between Proposition 8 and the Supreme Court finally overturning the unjust law was basically some of the most formative time a young person can have when they're figuring out their identity. And what California as a state said to me was that queer people were illegal. And that was really hard to reconcile with. And I think as a joke back then, thinking back to it now, reanalyzing these memories, we would say all these things to say we're everything but queer. We'd say we're heteroflexible, we're metrosexual, all these things to each other. But the reality was clear, is that it stuck with us. To think that society, our own state, would say our existence is wrong. And to think now a whole different generational shift is possible. We, in the next year, will be putting on the ballot affirmatively affirming that all people have the right to marry. And that kids today who cannot even conceive, just as our colleague from Sacramento said, cannot conceive that we ever outlawed this to begin with, who today don't even have to come out anymore, they just are, they just exist as they are, will get to affirmatively see that our state cares about them and vote for it. Not just by technicality of the courts, not just because this is how society evolved, but firmly in the California Constitution is a huge win for the queer community and young people coming up. Because I know when I was growing up, it wasn't allowed to be so. It was legal. But even today, as young people see so many horrific things happening in the queer community today, and we're under attack, at least in California, we can say affirmatively, right now, we are never going back. An urgent aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And Assemblymember Lowenthal, you're recognized on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I had no plan to speak today, but something occurred to me as we were honoring our immigrant community here in the great state of California today. On the same day, we have discussion on whether or not we should be enshrining marriage equality in our state constitution, and came across some facts I think that many of you might like to hear. There are 66 countries with jurisdictions that criminalize private, consensual, same-sex sexual activity. Majority of these jurisdictions explicitly criminalize sex between men via sodomy, buggery, and unnatural offenses laws. Almost half of those are Commonwealth countries. 41 countries criminalize private, consensual sexual activity between women using laws against lesbianism, sexual relations with a person of the same sex, gross indecency. Even in jurisdictions that do not explicitly criminalize women, lesbians and bisexual women have been subjected to arrest or threat of arrest. 12 countries have jurisdictions in which the death penalty is imposed or at least a possibility for private consensual same-sex sexual activity. At least 6 of those implement the death penalty. They have actually implemented it. Iran, northern Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Yemen. And the death penalty is a legal possibility in Afghanistan, Brunei, Mauritania, Pakistan, Qatar, UAE, and Uganda. And 14 countries criminalize the gender identity and or expression of transgender people using so-called cross-dressing, impersonation, and disguise laws. In many more countries, transgender people are targeted by a range of laws that criminalize same-sex activity and vagrancy, hooliganism, and public order offenses. There is no doubt why it is critically important for our state to be a beacon for the world and to be teaching the world what decency and human rights are all about. I respectfully ask for your aye vote on ACA 5.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. Seeing no other members wishing to be recognized on the measure, Mr. Lowe, anything further to close?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I appreciate the conversation. Permission to demonstrate some PDA via prop.
Without objection.
Colleagues, this is a picture of me and my boyfriend. We've been together for close to 4 years. And I told him that I was going to be referencing him at work. And I told him that constitutionally, I was able to officiate a wedding given our authority as members, duly elected members of the state legislature. But that there could be a point in time in which we could not get married ourselves because of the direction of the Supreme Court. I just want to be like you. I just want to be like your daughters, your sons, your neighbors, your teachers, and to fulfill the basic humanity of love. There is no vote more important and fundamental to basic human rights than the acknowledgement of love. No more. And as we push our button here today, I hope that we will have a resounding, bright voting board of all green. Because at the end of the day, as a colleague from San Diego once told me, if they show you who they are, believe them. Colleagues, let's show California that love will always win. I respectfully ask for aye vote on Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. The clerk will open the roll. All those vote who desire to vote. All those vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close roll, tally the votes. Ayes 66, no 0. The measure passes.